Hi, everyone. My name is Rachelle Abraham. I'm a sex and relationship therapist, hoping to provide you all with some tools and different ways of considering how endometriosis affects your relationship and hopefully provide some direction covering topics from emotional intimacy to sexual intimacy today. So, thank you for placing your trust in me, and let's get into it. So my name is Rachelle Abraham. I work at the Center for Relational and Sexual Wellbeing. We're in Wollongabba here in Queensland. And the center works with a lot of people who experience pelvic pain, which can look like vaginismus, endometriosis. We also do a lot of relationship therapy, which is where I primarily work. I have a master's in counseling. I got my bachelor in psychology back in the US. There's a few things listed there at the bottom. I don't expect you to have any understanding of what those might mean, but hopefully by the time we get to the end of today, they fit in a little bit better with some context, and we'll provide you further resources if there's a format that you hope to get more information from. We've got some books, we've got podcasts, Instagram. So if you have a preferred way that you like to learn a bit more about this, we're hoping to make this a bit more accessible so that the barriers that come with seeking relationship therapy aren't the only way that you get some support. So we have a disclaimer on top of a disclaimer, as was noted on the second slide, just for you all to know that this is going to be general in nature. So some of this might not be specific to the needs and nuance of your relationship. Best advice is just take the things that land with you, the things that resonate, the things that feel like they would fit in your life, and leave the bits that don't. That's true with any of the advice that's provided on those Instagram accounts and with the books that we might be suggesting as well. If you are seeking to see a relationship therapist after this, I'll touch on in the last slide how you might go about that, making sure that you find someone who is informed when it comes to persistent pain or disability, chronic illness, things like that. And I also want to do a bit of myth dispelling to let everyone know that there's a number of reasons why people might come and see me for relationship therapy. I think there's this idea out there that people have to be in quite a bit of distress in their relationship for them to seek some additional support. It's actually quite to the contrary. I see people for a variety of reasons. Some people are proactive. They anticipate that they're going to be doing some family planning, and they want to make sure that their communication is, I guess, in tip-top shape before they enter into that transition. Other people might have a relationship rupture, or they've noticed that communication has become a bit more challenging, but it's actually not necessarily that stereotypical thing that we've seen in movies and on TV, that people are quite explosive and they're yelling in sessions. I actually see very, very little of that. So oftentimes the role of the relationship therapist is to not be prescriptive in telling you what you need to do or what you have to do for your relationship to shift or change in a way that's going to be more healthy for you and your partner or supportive for you and your partner. It's much more often about the therapist holding up a mirror almost to the relationship and saying, this is what I see. Can you help me flesh this out? Are you seeing this as well? How do you feel when you see this? Are there bits that you would like to dial up in your relationship or bits that you would like to dial down? And then we sort of work from there, but it's intended to be collaborative. As you'll see in the slides there, you are the experts in your relationship. You're the ones that live it every single day. You're the ones that know your history. You're the ones that know the most about the people that are, make up the relationship. So it is not necessarily top down from me or any relationship therapist to you to say this is kind of the only way or the best way. We've got a variety of different things we can sort of use to support you. So if one thing doesn't land, the role of the therapist is on us to figure out something that does. The other thing that's important to note is all of the suggestions that I'm giving today, they are not necessarily specific to endometriosis. And what I mean by that is they actually don't even just apply to pelvic pain or persistent pain. These are strategies that I would recommend to people regardless of the topic that they bring to us, because generally speaking, the vast majority of people across the lifespan are going to have some experience of disability or some experience of physical or mental health challenges. And so the same way that we can support our relationship in being malleable across that may end up circling back 10 years down the track when the relationships have shifted a bit, and yet the same sort of template and suggestions would apply. So hopefully you can take a bit of that with you as well. So what we tend to find is, although there might be three or more of us individuals in the room, all of the people who are taking part in the relationship, as well as myself, there's also this sort of elephant in the room, right? Whether it's spoken from session number one or whether it's something that is just sort of felt. So a lot of the times we'll actually see that the dynamic is, if I were dealing with a dyad or a couple that's comprised of two people, it's not just the two people who are sitting in front of me, it's the two people who are sitting in front of me, and also this third thing, right? The way that endometriosis doesn't just affect the person who is experiencing it in their body, it also affects the person who's the supporting partner, and it affects the relationship between the two of you. And I think that's where things get really tricky, is because oftentimes we're looking at how endometriosis affects the person that's experiencing endo, understandably. And it can be quite a different dynamic and quite a different shift to, perhaps for the first time, ask the supporting partner the ways in which they've noticed their communication has changed between the pair of them as a result of this third thing. And for some people, that's going to be sex as that third thing, finances, family planning, mental health challenges, but it's in the room as well. And it's affecting sort of across all fronts. And it's important to get curious about all the ways in which that's kind of permeated through the relationship. So as you might imagine, seemingly obvious, right? The ways in which endo has affected each individual within themselves, the ways in which they might change how they approach their partner for needs, the way in which we might be receptive to our partner, trying to meet our needs. But the one that sort of takes up a bit more space with relationship therapy is the impact that it has on the relationship itself. So there are many different ways that this can look. I think a really common one that many of us are familiar with is this idea that we've become, as a pair, quite self-regulating. We don't intend to, but we take care of ourselves in a way that's, I don't want to put one more thing on them. I already feel like I'm asking for too much, or I already know how much suffering this person is enduring. And we sort of end up navigating life like roommates. And when they might come to see me for relationship therapy, they might say, we just feel like we haven't really got that connection anymore. How do we get that back? How do we, you know, I guess, allow that to flourish in the presence of endo being in the house with us as well, or being in the relationship with us as well. And there's a bit of a reframing that we do, because the belief is that all people in the relationship are doing the best that they can and doing things to preserve the relationship, things to maintain the relationship's well-being, things to uphold it and its longevity. And that might not always be the first thing that we look at, what we see like at first glance, if that makes sense. So getting really specific about the ways in which, whether or not your partner experiences this as maintaining the relationship, like how are you intending to maintain the relationship? How are you intending to nurture the relationship? Because it's the intention that is really what matters. There's a lot of juice there. There's a lot of really important stuff that we want to kind of reframe. But understandably, as human beings going through these challenging experiences, we sit in the way that it lands for me, the impact that it lands on me. So balancing that, what are you trying to do for the relationship? What are you trying to do with the best intentions possible? No one ever, it's seemingly, no one's going to seek out to keep things to themselves and not discuss mental health challenges with their partner as a means of being sneaky or deceptive. The vast majority of the time, the people that I have the pleasure of working with are doing that for a reason that we want to make sense of and understand and find compassion for, as well as understanding that that may have a negative impact on the other person. And while we're trying to tend to the ways in which each person is managing the relationship or trying to support the relationship, we also want to get curious about what each person's doing individually to tend to the emotions that might come up for them through this process. So how are they tending to grief? How are they tending to sadness? If they have any shame in the relationship, how are they taking care of their body to process through the feelings of shame or grief or fury or frustration. And getting a bit of the lay of the land is sort of what those initial sessions would be like. And then we get a bit more into the, once we have that context, okay, let's get into the specific. Tell me what this looks like if I were a fly on the wall, if I were to be in the home with you or out with you at a picnic in the park on a Saturday, and things start to take a bit of a turn, like this attempt for connection pivots into something that's a bit more, no, I just don't feel like you quite understand me, or I don't really feel like you quite, we're not clicking in the same way that we'd like to be. And this might not look like tension or, distress, but you can feel that shift in your body that something has pivoted. So this is where, if you'd like to number these, I guess this is where tip number 1 would come in. So the shift from understanding intent versus impact. So behind each of the actions that all of us take, there's going to be a motor behind it, if you will. And that motor tends to be good intentions. I'm going to place faith in all of you watching this through the internet that in the vast majority of cases, there's going to be good intentions to, as we said previously, like uplift the relationship, to nourish something in the relationship, to alleviate distress for our partners. And I'm wanting to understand quite a bit about that motor behind the action rather than focusing primarily on the action itself. That definitely involves, it takes up time in the session. We want to know about that content, but I want to know just as much about the process that's kind of happening, which is the part that you're going to hopefully let the other person into, because I can't reach into my partner's mind and pluck out exactly what their intention was. So I've listed a couple examples here of things that we tend to see when it comes to persistent pain, but also just when it comes to any relationship dynamic. If we were speaking about a couple of friends and we hear that one of them is trying to initiate kissing or closeness or intimacy in some way, I say, oh, that's so sweet. You have such longing for your partner. You've been together for 15 years and you still have that spark and that zest. And then we might watch the other person. It's kind of like, not now. Like, we're out with friends. And so I would get a bit curious, right? I would say, what happened there? And tell me as much as you can and be as specific as possible about the intention behind leaning in for a kiss or putting my hand on your thigh while I'm wanting to feel connected to you. Or, it's been months and months or years and years since we've connected in this sexual or close way. And I'm really needing to feel desired. I'm hoping to feel desired. I'm trying to, again, either take care of my needs or like emotional needs to feel desired. We're not talking physical needs for sex, let's say, but the emotional need to feel desired, the emotional need to feel connected. Tell me about the intention behind it. Another one that we see, right, is staying quiet when we notice that something distressing is coming up for us. So I'm noticing frustration. I'm finding myself telling myself a story about why I'm frustrated and what you've done that's caused my frustration. And I'd want to get really curious about that and say, okay, tell me about this. So when you notice that frustration, what does it then fuel you, as that motor idea? What does that then fuel you to do? Well, they've already got so much on their plate. I don't want to burden them with one more thing. I just think I'm not going to bring it up. And either down the track, let's say a few months later, we end up finding out that our partner's been keeping something to themselves and they've been so distressed and their mental health has been shifting and changing and deteriorating, for example. And then, why didn't you tell me? Like, why didn't you tell me? Like, why didn't you trust me? Or, this is what we need to be communicating about. And they can be so hurt in the experience that this was kept from them. It makes it really challenging when we're experiencing that hurt ourselves to sort of look for that good intention, look for that, like, what were you trying to do to support the relationship? And I'm not saying 100% of the time there's good intentions, right? So we are human, we are fallible. There are always going to be mistakes that are made. Sometimes we just don't quite get it right. But I would like to see if there is good intention to be found. I would like to do our best to find it. And having that separation for both partners between what I was intending to do, and understanding that that does not negate the fact that it has landed quite a significant and different impact on you. And it's not quite got us to that connecting point that I was hoping to. In fact, it's done quite the opposite. Like oftentimes, how did we end up further apart when what I was trying to do was bring us closer together? And so it's a bit of that reframe and trying to have those conversations with a bit more, what was I trying to achieve? Perhaps rather than getting stuck in the specifics of it, I would actually get a bit more curious about what I was hoping to do was actually alleviate the pain that you're going through. And the partner might say, but it feels like you're just not listening. What I'm actually needing is not for you to problem solve, especially with something like persistent pain. I actually don't know if you can just reach into me and pluck this out. There is not going to be that for us today. But what you can do is you can be with me and you can sit with me and you can listen, and there can be empathy and compassion. And that actually is what I'm asking for. That actually is the need that I'm hoping for you to meet. But oftentimes we go, should we change your specialist? Should we go and do something else? Should we read this book? You know, they're doing to the best of their ability what they can to preserve the relationship, to alleviate pain in the person that I care about. And yet when it doesn't quite land that connection, it leaves us kind of guessing, okay, well, how do we miss each other? Like, how did we misinterpret? And hoping that we can bridge a bit of that gap. So the relationship therapist acts as a bit of a translator, if you will, sort of saying, are we speaking different languages? Is there a way we can meet in the middle here? The other thing that I always find important to touch on, and we have to be very gentle with the way that we navigate this, because so much of the process of a relationship navigating endometriosis is going to be directed towards the person who is experiencing the endo. There is oftentimes little to no space to be left to pose questions to the supporting partner. I believe quite a bit of this is changing for people who sort of say, we understand that this is going to be pervasive and affect both you and your loved ones and your home. And let's get curious about the way in which this affects your supporting partner. And it may be the first time that someone perhaps asked when you come into relationship therapy, how has this experience been for you? Is there anything that you have lost in this experience? And they go, well, you know, I've decided to give up some of my recreational hobbies, or we've shifted things and I'm in a bit of a carer role, or I just don't bring up my needs for sexual intimacy anymore. We want to give that stuff a voice because it might be the first time for some people that they've been asked. And I think that's because so many of us are wired to look to the person who is experiencing the most distress. But when we get into those games of comparison, who is experiencing the most distress, it means that we're less likely to see that there is also other distress present. And so some of the things that might come up when I'm navigating this with people in relationships, um, grief, right, for the life that the pair of you perhaps had before this past surgery, or the life that the two of you had prior to getting the diagnosis, or the way that things could be in future. There might be grief there for not just one, but both partners. And I'd want to get curious about allowing them both to take up space, or allowing them all to take up space in the relational dynamic. The other thing that's quite common for people, the extreme version of this would be, I feel like a monster. I've heard quite a few people say this, like, I feel like a monster. I can't make sense of the fact that I am still wanting to initiate sexual intimacy with this person, and yet I know that they're in pain, or I know that anything sexual could potentially cause a flare up for them. And then I become afraid as well that I might cause pain for them, or that they might be in pain during or following any sort of, particularly with penetrative sex as well. I don't want to be causing that. This person's already in so much distress. And so we want to give voice to that stuff, because we can't soften and navigate all of these dynamics if we actually don't know what's happening there. And so oftentimes it can be a really careful dynamic of, how do you, the person who's experiencing endo, how do you feel when you hear them talk about being afraid that they're going to hurt you? how do you feel as the person experiencing endo? That they feel guilty or ashamed, that they would love to have more of a physical, non-sexual relationship in that sense. Like, I just would love to make out with you. It's like, how can I possibly think of being present and focusing on pleasure when I'm experiencing so much pain? Like, how do you feel in your body when you hear them say that? And sort of navigating those dynamics with a relationship therapist, ideally there to do a little bit of tweaking and a little bit of translating and getting to the heart of the fact that at the end of the day, both partners are wanting, or all partners are wanting, to experience connection, to feel like they are prioritized, to feel like they are heard, to feel like they are attuned to feel like they can depend on one another. I think the other thing also is, could you maybe bring to light explicitly and tell us what are the things that you're trying to do to support the relationship? What are the things that you're doing? Do you feel seen in the way that you're trying to uphold the relationship? Do you feel seen in the way that you're trying to nourish the other person in their distress? And oftentimes what we hear is, yeah, but it doesn't move anything. They're still in pain, or they're still upset, or they're still feeling alone in their experience of endometriosis. And we get into the question then of, is the only effort that matters the effort that lands? Or can both things be true at the same time? Can you both know that I am putting in a lot of effort to prioritize your needs, a lot of effort to maintain our connection, and my partner still feel disconnected? And my partner feeling disconnected, or my partner feeling just alone, doesn't take away from the fact that I know within myself that I have been putting in effort, and I can see it and I can feel it, and I know because I'm aware of my intention, separate and distinct from the fact that this hasn't alleviated it for you, and the impact it's landed is you're still feeling hurt despite these things. So it's a slow process of kind of reframing the way that each partner tells themselves the story of endo and how it's affecting their relationship, or how it has affected their relationship. The other thing that I believe a few other videos have touched on is this idea of shifting the focus from the way that a lot of us, or all of us, arguably, were taught about sex and what constitutes sex, and what, the stereotypical, we're both meant to have penetrative sex. The focus is on penis and vagina sex. The focus is on orgasm, mutual orgasm. We both orgasm at the same time, and there's fireworks in the background. And much of what I see is a society where people are suffering as a result of those templates that we were handed, when I'm yet to meet people who fit that description that I've just laid out for you. Now, unlearning this stuff is not something that's going to happen overnight. And I think noticing what happens in our bodies if we get frustrated or defensive or start comparing to other relationships, when I suggest that partners shift the focus from penetrative sex specifically to more of a pleasure focused model. Like, if something comes up when I suggest that, that's something we should have a look at. Maybe let that take a bit more space. Maybe talk about that in the relationship. Does it feel like you are losing something? Does it feel like you are compromising on something? Or is it just that we were sort of never suggested that there was an alternative? So switching to something that's going to be more of a pleasure focused model also changes this idea that sex is sort of progressive, right? We hold hands and we kiss, and we're going to have passionate intimacy, and at some point there's going to be nudity, and at some point there might be manual or oral stimulation on our genitals, and then we're going to have penetrative intercourse, and then there's orgasm and things wrap up. Shifting that to not so much a stages model that progresses from one thing to the next thing, but viewing that each of these, as well as all the things that aren't included in that list, like sexting your partner, for example, are still complete and whole sex acts in and of themselves, and they don't need to be a precursor to something better or further along, or that sort of like finishing the race type of mentality. Because there are many times where people will say, I thought it was phenomenal that we were sexting the other day, or I thought it was really nice when you told me about our favorite time having sex. It was nice to listen to you tell that because I thought you would have said a different time, or this is actually mine. Like those are all sex acts in and of themselves. And so that's a really important reframe. I believe Hillary Lindbergh, who has another video that's on here, has taken some time to speak about the sexual smorgasbord, which is all of the potential for different options that are complete whole sex acts in and of themselves. If we shower together naked, is that a sex act, or is the only thing that counts penetration? And allowing that model to sort of flourish a bit more means we have the ability to have more connected experiences. There's also, for a lot of people, this sort of ... problem. So where when sexual intimacy starts to shift and change, it can permeate out into that physical intimacy. So not cuddling on the couch anymore, because I'm worried that if we cuddle on the couch or fall asleep while we're spooning naked, is it going to lead to? Is it the ... to the next thing? Or kind of like lily pads along the way. And sometimes that can permeate out even further, not just the sexual intimacy, and then noticing that there's been a decrease in the amount of physical non-sexual intimacy we've had, but it can permeate out into our emotional intimacy, and noticing that tension between us, or that distance between us, or sort of two people living separately in the same home. And I think it's really important to sort of notice that shift. Whereas when we have this transition from sex acts as progressive precursors to something else, to more of you can pick up and take as much or as little off of these plates as possible. And some days you can just do this thing, and other days you can just do this thing. And if I grab you on the butt, that's not an initiation into having penetrative sex, but I just wanted to let you know that I was thinking of you and I was desiring you. And so when we're looking at things like, silly example though it may be, grabbing our partner on the butt or wrapping our arms around them, and seeing that as a bid for connection, which is something that you might find in a lot of relationship therapy work. The aim is to connect with the other person. And there are dozens of these usually throughout the day and throughout the week, where we're trying to connect with our partner, where we're trying to nourish our relationship, wanting to feel together in a lot of this as well. Those moments, when we notice them, if they feel safe to engage in without it being a precursor to something else, it's more likely for many people that their body can start to understand and be present in the safety that, like, this is just it and it's not going anywhere, which then allows me to enjoy and be present and embodied in the experience without my mind being fearful of, is there the expectation of the next step? And I think this is a really common challenge, again, not just for people who are experiencing endometriosis, but also for a lot of relationships as we go through years down the track, when we've had more experience, when there's been more stability, and things shift and change inevitably as they do. We have to be malleable and creative in the way in which we try to still uphold intimacy across emotional, sexual, and physical non-sexual intimacy. Rather than models that might work for other people or might have worked for us at a different stage of our relationship. The other thing that's important to note too is spending some time kind of reflecting within yourself whether sex, and specifically penetrative sex, is the only way in which I can achieve the emotional feeling that I'm hoping to experience. So if you're hoping to feel desired, is penetrative sex the only way that I can do that? Or is a sex act at all the only way that I can do that? And does it involve quite a bit of creativity and also self-reflection about, am I actually just wanting sex? Why is it that I'm wanting partnered sex when I could masturbate, for example? There's something about having partnered sex and having another person there that tells us that there's another additional need that's not just the function that might come with partnered sex or come with masturbation, for example. There's something that's different, and I'm curious for people when they come in about what that difference is, so that we can talk about it quite frankly. Sort of on that note, these 5 dimensions of touch is a good example of we can engage in one of these things, and that can be complete and whole and a connected, embodied experience for all parties, and not need to view them as progression towards penetrative touch. So this could be, yeah, resting my head on my partner's chest while they tell me about their favorite memory of us, or the most spontaneous sex we had had, or something that they're hoping perhaps one day we might be able to engage in, like a fantasy that they might have had. For other people, this might be reading erotica together. It might be reading erotica to the other person. It could be reflecting on things that we've seen in movies that seem, oh, I kind of, no, I don't think I would like that. I don't really like morning sex. I don't really want to engage with that. Even those conversations around sex and intimacy are still complete and whole sex acts. And I think it's Dr. Karen Gurney who advises for people that we don't need things to be high stakes and infrequent. We want the measures of sexual connection to be trivial and frequent. So we want them to be, the example I gave earlier of grabbing your partner on the bum, and then that's that. And then later in the week, we might have a really passionate make out. We might be really involved in each other's experience of touching one another's skin while we have a shower together. And that's that. And it doesn't need to be a precursor to something else. And so if they're trivial and often, that's sort of the aim that we want to head towards. The other factor that comes up with this is initiation can be quite challenging. So first, being clear within yourselves what the template for initiation has been in your relationship. Are there things that you like about that? Are there things that you find yourself longing for? If they used to be different in the past, do you want some of that back? If it's a shared experience of initiating, has it shifted into one person initiating? Is there a best way in which you would like to be approached when it comes to initiating? And also, if one of us is making that really vulnerable bid for connection, sort of saying, hey, would you like to? That bid for connection does not mean that you owe them the response of, yes, absolutely, let's do it. Let's do penetrative sex. It's going to be fantastic. But when I have to say, I'm in pain, or I'm not in the mood, or I'm not willing to make out, whatever the reason is, how can that message be most well received? And sometimes that's going to be about the person and how they deliver the message, and other people, it's going to be about the way that they hear it. And this is sort of where that's going to be unique to the work that you would have to do with a relationship therapist, because I wouldn't be able to generalize, right? For some people, they say, when it's your body language that indicates that it's a no, I find that a lot harder than when you tell me, hey, I'm in quite a bit of pain. Or if you say no and I don't have the reason or the context, a lot of fear comes up for me that it's because you don't find me attractive anymore. Okay, well, now you've told me what the need is, and I can tend to the fact that you're hoping to feel desired, or that you're afraid that I no longer desire you, and I can meet that. And it was sort of as if the sexual intimacy was a vessel for you to sort of seek that need, and we can still meet that need even without the vessel of sexual intimacy. So if there's a way that you find that it's easier for you to hear someone's no, or if there's a way that's easier for you to say no, or deflect to, I don't want to have penetrative sex today, but I think it actually could be really hot if I could watch you masturbate. That is still a complete and whole sex act in and of itself. And it's a pivot to say, I'm not going to be open to doing this. I don't want my body involved at all today. I'm having a substantial flare up. However, here's an alternative. And again, never any guarantee of an alternative. You are more than welcome to always just say flat out no and not provide any reasoning. You are welcome to just use your body language to indicate that. However, if there's a way in your communication that you find that it could still remain connected while being mindful of the vulnerability present in being the person to initiate or being the person to decline, is there a way that we can make that a bit more digestible for all parties involved? So, last but not least, if this stuff has intrigued you at all, if this has kind of got the ball rolling, actually, I feel like I thought I had an extra slide. Okay, well, we're gonna have to edit that chunk out. Anyway, um, so if any of the stuff that we've touched on today has particularly resonated or it has piqued your interest and you know the way in which you digest this information best, there's going to be quite a few downloadables and like digital one sheets that we're putting up on the Center for Relational and Sexual Wellbeing's website. But there's also our Instagram page. We follow about 300 people and creators and businesses and services that work in this space across all mental health topics. So if there's something in particular, for example, if you are in a queer relationship and you'd like something that's more specific to that, if you are in a non-monogamous relationship and you would like support that's more specific to that, if you want to follow pages that are specifically couples counseling for people who are parents, there's quite a few great creators that we follow on there. Um, Otherwise, the suggestion of podcasts, if you like to listen to things, people have busy lives, they don't have time to read an entire book. I absolutely understand that. So finding the way in which you tend to digest this information best. The book recommendation there says that it's specific for libido differences, but I find that it is pretty comprehensive in giving us the sex education that we should have had. It covers all range of topics from asexuality to different ways to approach persistent pain. Um, it really is quite educational when it comes to responsive desire versus spontaneous desire. So don't let the title deter you. We'll just consider that book sort of the sex education that I wish we had all had, and not specific necessarily to the libido differences. Last but not least, it's important to note that if you've noticed that some of this stuff feels like it might be helpful, or if you had any preconceived notions about the type of people who seek support from a relationship therapist, and perhaps we've dispelled a little bit of that, you are more than welcome to try and seek a relationship therapist in the area that you work in. Now, many places are going to offer telehealth, so you don't need to specifically find someone in your city. But if the place you'd like to start is just Googling the city or town that you live in, uh, plus couples therapy or plus relationship therapy, um, and seeing if they've worked with chronic conditions or seeing if they've worked with pain or speaking to their administration team and asking if they're familiar with disability and working with people with disability. All of that's going to be helpful to sort of get a feel for who the person is that you'd like to work with for this process, and being gentle with yourselves that if it's not the right fit, it's not the right fit. You want to make sure that there's not just emotional safety between the partners, but also that we feel we've got emotional safety to sit in that vulnerable position with the therapist as well. Otherwise, I hope some of this has been helpful and I appreciate you all taking the time to listen to me today. Cheers. Thank you.